Greetings, citizens of the world. This is Anonymous Talk You. We are independent like all others, who choose to become anonymous for the sake of our own right to privacy. We are not a hacker pack of the Anonymous Cooperative. That is left to others. We wear the white hat and unite to reveal and promote truth and expose corruption in government and the corporate world wherever it is found. We are not anti-government. We stand against corruption within government by corporate-sponsored and backed politicians whose goals ultimately are to bring in a new world order which stands itself to be nothing less than a conspiratorial act against the American Constitution. We are born-again Christians. We are fundamentally sound in doctrine, which traces back to the time of Jesus according to what we now call the Holy Bible, in adherence to the King James Version, which withstands the test of time.
There is a growing citizens movement demanding an explanation of chemtrails.
And I talked to my NSA buddies at Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, and Buckley, where I was actually their doctor taking care of the pilots flying and spraying the chemtrails. So I know it's real. If anybody says it's not real, they're full of it.
It's not the same as conducting some localized test for some defensive project. This is open air operations. It's not a test. This thing is in place.
It didn't start until about 1996.
Exactly.
And growing up my whole life, a condensation trail disappeared, the 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. And now it can be in the summer at like 4,000 feet, and there's these big clouds behind jets. Some jets leave it behind, leave a trail behind them. Other jets at the same flight level, same altitude don't. And instead of just getting into are they spraying us or what's changed in the jet fuel or what's changed in the atmosphere, there are tens of thousands.
Talking about the elephant in the room, what is so obvious to all of us.
There's a feeling from that area that the state doing all of these weather modification programs might not be doing it for the benefit of the citizens of Texas and other states that they may impact as well.
Well, many of the planes that we're seeing here in Abilene will actually turn whatever they're spraying on and off right before our eyes. I mean, you'll see a plane up there flying like normal, and then all of a sudden it starts spraying. We've seen them fly off into the distance and then loop around and fly back again. These are not your typical planes with a preordained path destination from city to city. Someone needs to explain to me why do they stop traveling in one particular direction and then loop around and come back again. They perform this behavior so many times that we start seeing the tic-tac-toe grids in the sky. We're witnessing the giant X's. And I mean, Rosalind, when you and I grew up, these contrails naturally dissipated in a few seconds or perhaps a minute max. But these things expand, they grow bigger, and before you know it, the entire sky is overcast.
That's correct. And they are there all day. They do loop the loop around our county and our state. We follow them at times with spotters in different areas, watching the planes loop, come back around. And we know from the FAA records that the jets from commercial airlines fly in straight lines. And coming across our county, there aren't many, and they stay mostly in certain patterns. The jets that we see leaving the persistent jet contrails move in directions that normal jets wouldn't fly because it would use too much fuel and put them off schedule. And the jets that we see here do loops. We've got pictures of them looping the same X's and crosshatches. But I believe that some of that, not only are they looking for keeping something in the air almost all the time, but we feel that some of the markings are to mark the start and stop areas for their programs so that they can watch their experiments either from satellite or the ground.
This is a full-scale secret operation that includes not only the U.S. but Europe and the rest of the world?
Well, that's apparent because you can see the pictures from all over the world, and I get them constantly. Some areas are worse than others. The excuse for this is, number one, weather modification, number two, to save us from global warming, and number three, to save us from the terrorists. A lot of these programs, of which there are many patterns and which has been designated as wake vortex simulation carried out by NASA Langley Research Center. Many of these operations and the patents go on to explain how if there is a biological attack by terrorists at some point, that these exercises and practices will, in a sense, save us with the spider webbery that comes down from the aerosol spraying, potentially gathering the chemical mass spray that could be sprayed on any given population. The problem with that is the terrorists don't have the means to deliver this. They don't have the access to deliver this over the American populace per se. And the only people who have been doing this, that is biological experiments on the American people, is the military themselves, which has been admitted from everything from Operation Shad to the spraying that happened in San Francisco, I believe back in the 60s and the 70s, that literally killed people.
Again, I may not be able to ascribe intent, but what I can say is that it is expected that there will be increased mortality as well as the potential of a huge host of unknown pathogens that we are subject to, and this is not based on speculation. There's a whole arena of biological research that we haven't even begun to touch on.
Could a strange substance found by a Southwest Arkansas man be part of a barium found in our sample?
Tonight, a committee of the San Bernardino Mountains has a real mystery on its hands. The official explanation here is that jet contrails are causing strange lines in the sky.
What effects barium has on the body. Short-term exposure can lead to anything from stomach to chest pains. Long-term exposure causes blood pressure problems. Ryan addressed concerns by chemtrail researchers that barium could be meant to wear down a person's immune system.
You're talking about dominating our air supply without the human consent in a way that is difficult for many of us certainly to conceive, and certainly many of us refuse to accept it even in the light of sufficient and overwhelming evidence.
That chemtrail? Nope. We think we're above it. I know. Oh, we'd be dead right now.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Jordan, chairman of the conference. I'm going to just introduce Khalid Dawood, who will introduce the speakers. So Khalid, thank you very much for moderating this session, and I turn it over to you, and I will return in about 3 minutes.
So our next speaker is Dr. Rosalind Peterson. She's the California president and co-founder of the Agriculture Defense Coalition, formed in 2006 to protect agriculture crop production from uncontrolled experimental weather modification programs. A very interesting topic, you know, for a non-specialized person like myself. But also very interesting in her CV that we have with you is also her extensive efforts to protect drinking water supplies from toxic chemical contamination in Martinez, California. That's a very interesting topic, of course, and I was actually wondering myself whether you can tackle whether the same experiments that you're holding in California could be extended to other world countries, particularly poor and developed countries like where we come from. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. It is a pleasure to be here to speak with all of you today. One of the things that I would like to say is that we are in a global drumbeat right at the moment talking about climate change and global warming. One of the things that is affected by climate change is agriculture. But some of what we are seeing is man-made, but man-made in a different way than you may guess. Weather modification programs, experimental ones done by private companies, done by the United States government, done by states across the United States, are underway. There's more than 50 of them in operation across the United States. All of these impact agriculture because they change the microclimates needed for agriculture to survive. None of these programs that I know of today, and this is all public record, are available at any time with oversight, agricultural oversight or public oversight. These programs impact agriculture, and there are programs around the world. International corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Most of it is chemically altered, so that what happens is that we are putting chemicals, ground-based chemicals that are shot into the air, or chemicals coming from airplanes that change and modify our weather. So one of the things that I'm concerned about and that we need to address in the future is how these programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. If we change the growing season, the pollinators may not survive, and also our crops, our flowers, and our tree crops may not get the pollination needed. So one of my areas is looking at this situation to see if we can begin to put under control experimental and other types of weather modification programs. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather an undefined term at this period of time. And so what happens is that many times we're talking about artificially putting chemicals like sulfur or particulates into the atmosphere in what they call geoengineering schemes to reduce and help the planet, supposedly, but help the planet to not go through such a tremendous global climate change and to mitigate global warming. However, the incidence of putting chemicals into our atmosphere is going to change and impact agricultural crop production. And if you take and you put up into our skies chemicals to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth, you are going to begin to reduce crop production. Studies at the University of Illinois on corn crop production show reductions. Without the process of photosynthesis, whereby plants from direct sunlight gain the energy to grow, to produce crops, we are going to find ourselves, if we mitigate in that direction, impacting the crop production not only here in the United States, but worldwide. One of the things that is impacting crop production right now in the United States and reducing photosynthesis and also impacting the ability of solar power panels to generate the type of power that they should is persistent jet contrails. NASA talks about persistent jet contrails as exacerbating global warming because they trap warmth in the atmosphere when they produce cirrus and man-made clouds. NASA also talks about that that these aircraft leaving persistent contrails are changing our climate. And when they change our climate to the degree that one jet can leave a persistent jet contrail, which will spread across our skies from what this picture up here on my left on the screen looks like, which is a trail left by a jet, that trail can expand to 4,000 kilometers and last for 20 hours. This was unheard of in the early 60s and the 70s, and it wasn't until the late 1980s that there was a change and we started to have persistent jet contrails that persist. NASA studies show that part of our global warming problem could be attributed to these types of contrails and the jets that leave them. So one of the issues as we go through is, how do you like your skies, natural or man-made? And right now we are making man-made clouds, and this is trapping warmth in our atmosphere. The climate change that is produced by these jets not all jets, mostly some non-commercial. But what happens to our skies is that we start to see the changes. The man-made clouds do trap the warmth, and they increase the humidity. This allows for pests to proliferate, diseases, molds, mildews, funguses, and viruses. This is a man-made cloud, ladies and gentlemen, and these pictures I took myself over Northern California, and this is a burst. This is where a jet left a huge plume, and then this turned in at the end of it to a burst, and this is not normal, never seen before in our county historically, and I was born and raised there. This is another picture showing the jet trail just before the burst. This is our skies, and I want you to know that what you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. And what happens as we reduce the amount of sunlight in a form of global dimming, we reduce the solar power with these type of clouds, and we reduce photosynthesis, which is going to impact agriculture. The pictures look odd. The formations don't look like normal clouds that people have seen before historically. This is another type of man-made cloud, and what we have done and what you're seeing here is we have the photographs from the times that the jet leaves the first trail as a thin, spindly trail to where they form into these different types of cloud formations. All of you can start looking up and seeing this. What happens is that there are experiments, and there's a color, you can see some color in this photograph. And part of what we're doing also is we're sending up canisters. The United States government, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, is sending up canisters into the atmosphere filled with chemicals to modify and experiment with our ionosphere. And when we modify and experiment with our ionosphere up here, we create experiments which they can see through these persistent jet contrails as they stay in the sky for long periods of time, and they can watch the experiments. The type of chemicals they are using are aluminum, barium, strontium, and these canisters are sent up on rockets, and what they do is they superheat the canisters to create experiments in our atmosphere. The experiments can give you colorful auroras, which they talk about as being wonderful. Many times people think that the auroras in Alaska and the ones we see are normal, but there's beginning to be more and more seen across the United States and elsewhere where aluminum, trimethyl aluminum experiments to make clouds are beginning to impact us. The reason I am concerned for agriculture is that none of these experiments have any public oversight nor agricultural oversight. Our drinking water is impacted because the chemicals are now beginning to show up in our drinking water. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into, with increased pollution and acid rain, gets into the root systems of our crop trees and our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought. But they're not. What happens is that the root systems can no longer absorb the water and the nutrients needed to survive. Many of our forests in Redding, California and other areas are dying. The oak trees, the redwood trees, the Douglas fir across the United States, many areas. We believe that these trees are impacted because they cannot absorb enough water because aluminum is going into their root systems. Also, molds, mildew, and fungus from warmer temperatures produced by persistent jet contrails are also allowing pests and molds to proliferate, also impacting tree health and crop health. The skies that you see up here It is important to note, have a white haze to them. When crossing the United States 2 days ago, we saw this man-made produced haze all the way across the United States. There were a few real clouds. We saw the persistent jet contrails from the jet windows, and the skies in the white haze looked a lot like this. So one of the things that we need to really look at is that jet fuel emissions contaminate our air, much as automobile exhaust. They know from scientific studies back in the 1970s that they deplete beneficial ozone in the atmosphere by releasing nitric acid. So one of the things that we need to look at is the impact of just jet fuel and just the emissions from jets as well. I want to go on and talk briefly about a couple of issues here that I think are important for everyone to realize. If we don't look at the problems that we are creating, the atmospheric testing programs, in other words, the jet contrails that are warming our climate, and we say to ourselves, we want to geoengineer something else. We want to add more particulates to help global warming or to stop climate change. What we're going to have is we're going to have a pea soup up there of chemicals which are going to be detrimental to our health. It is much better to take the EPA model of the 1970s, where the Environmental Protection Agency was designed to put in regulations to reduce the pollution at its source, to reduce and put caps on how much pollution corporations, cars, automobiles were putting into the atmosphere. One of the things that we're talking about as mitigation is to go into geoengineering plans which add more chemicals to our atmosphere, which are going to get into our drinking water supplies, which are going to get into our soils, which are going to impact our trees. Our trees across the United States, many of them in many areas, especially Mendocino, Lake, and Sonoma County, are dying. They are not healthy as they used to be. And this problem, having traveled across the United States into some other areas, seeing the pictures coming in from across the United States and other countries, we're finding that there's beginning to be an impact from all of these programs and all the chemicals in our skies. And so one of the things we need to think about and work for is reducing pollution. Alan Buckman from the California State Department in Fish and Game talked about microbes, and they're important to the environment. We have at our disposal already some technologies and already the wherewithal to begin to make the planet more healthy and to put it into a different perspective. But if we go to the geoengineering schemes that are waiting in the wings, thousands of them, to put the particulates up and sulfur, then we are going to be in trouble with agriculture across the United States and around the world. It is time that we look at some different solutions that are already here, and it's time that we look at what's happening in our skies and say we don't need to add any more chemicals, we are doing enough. And what these experiments in our skies are doing with atmospheric heating and testing, we don't know, but the chemicals are showing up in our drinking water. So in closing, I would like to say to all of you and to encourage you to know that just what I showed you today is beginning to impact crop production in the United States. And we're seeing higher UV radiation that is burning the tips of our trees and our plants. We see the molds and mildews growing here, and we see all of this, and we hope that all of you will consider before you think of mitigation and just go forward with some of the plans that are being sold to you as almost a cap and trade situation, where a corporation like Planktos decides to put iron dust into the Galapagos Islands area. This is a proposal, may have already started, and to create algae blooms. And yes, they're saying, yes, we're going to help the environment because we're going to create these algae blooms for more oxygen. But what happens is it's going to impact the marine life in those areas. As a geoengineering plan, it is going to be sold, the credits for this, the supposed benefits, is to be sold as credits to people who want to pollute more. And here's the really awful twist to this, in my opinion, is if we sell pollution credits to polluters to ask them so that they can pollute more, we're only going to add more to our climate change and to our global warming processes. We have to say, no, we don't want money market schemes that are going to go into the ocean and change something possibly to the detriment of our oceans or our air in order to sell credits to someone who wants to pollute more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a consideration for all of you when you start to talk about caps and trades, when you start to talk about geoengineering plans, because we don't need a money market scheme. We need to have and use the microbes available to us, the science available to us to reduce the pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere, and we need a new direction, and I think that this might be a good one. So I hope that all of you will consider what I have to say today, and I want to thank you once again for listening to what I had to say.
Voyager 2 took this picture of Io on the evening of July 9, 1979, from a range of 1.2 million kilometers, 745,700 miles. On the limb of Io are two blue volcanic eruption plumes about 100 kilometers, 62 miles high. These two plumes were first seen by Voyager 1 in March 1979, and are designated Plume 5 upper and Plume 6 lower. They apparently had been erupting for a period of at least 4 months, and probably longer. A total of 6 plumes were seen by Voyager 2, all of which were first seen by Voyager 1. Plume 1, the largest volcano viewed by Voyager 1, was no longer erupting when Voyager 2 arrived. Plume 4 was not viewed on the edge of Io's disk by Voyager 2, and, therefore, it is not known whether it was still erupting. Ra Patara is a large shield volcano with multicolored flows. This image shows at least a dozen dark flows originating from the central dark vent. Some of these flows are 300 kilometers, 186 miles, in length. This picture shows a cutaway view of the possible internal structure of Io. The images were created from a mosaic of images obtained by NASA's Galileo spacecraft. Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. The interior characteristics of the Moon are inferred from gravity field and magnetic field measurements by the Galileo spacecraft. Io's radius is 1,821 km, similar to the 1,738 km radius of our Moon. Io has a metallic, iron, nickel core, shown in grey, drawn to the correct relative size. The core is surrounded by a rock shell, shown in brown. Io's rock, or silicate shell, extends to the surface. Io is composed of silicate rock surrounding a molten iron, or iron sulfide core. While most moons in the outer solar system, like Callisto for example, are made up of mostly water ice and rock, Io is composed of silicate rock, which surrounds either a molten iron or iron sulfide core. This makes Io closer to the terrestrial planets in bulk composition than the satellites of the outer solar system. Io has a density of 3.5275 G/cm3, which is higher than any moon in the solar system, and significantly higher than the other Galilean moons of Jupiter. It is denser than Earth's moon as well. Jupiter's third largest moon, Io, is the most volcanically active body in the solar system, as confirmed by the longest-running observations of the moon's thermal output. The regular eruptions and freely flowing lava put Io at the bottom of anyone's list of great outer space vacation destinations. Researchers from the University of California, Berkeley, obtained 29 months' worth of thermal images of Io's hot spots, regions where hot magma from the moon's mantle is forced up through the surface crust. On a given night, we may see half a dozen or more different hot spots, said Catherine de Clear, a UC Berkeley graduate student who led the observations, in a press release. Of Io's hundreds of active volcanoes, we have been able to track the 50 that were the most powerful over the past few years. A thermal image of Io taken on December 25, 2015 that shows the moon's most powerful volcano, Loki Patera, as well as the hot spot Amaterasu Patera erupting at the same time. Catherine de Clear /Imke de Pater /UC Berkeley. Using near-infrared adaptive optics on the 10-meter Keck Roman 2 and the 8-meter Gemini North, two of the largest telescopes in the world, fittingly located near the summit of Hawaii's dormant volcano Mauna Kea, the Berkeley research team determined the temperatures and specific power outputs of individual eruptions on Io. The team found that hot spots can reach temperatures of more than 1,300 Kelvin, or about 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. The volcanic hot spots also seem to migrate over the moon as time passes. Some eruptions even appeared to trigger volcanic events hundreds of kilometers away, almost a third of the way around the entire moon. Io is a little more than a quarter of the size of the Earth. While it stretches the imagination to devise a mechanism that could operate over distances of 500 kilometers, Io's volcanism is far more extreme than anything we have on Earth, and continues to amaze and baffle us. The Clear said.
In March 1979, the Voyager 1 space probe sent the first detailed view of Jupiter's tiny moon, Io. A world once thought of as cold and dead.
And they saw something really weird. They saw this arc next to the moon. And it looked almost as if like there was another moon behind it.
And we scratched our heads and said, well, what could that be? Everybody knows that Io is dead, boring, uninteresting. And then people realize, oh my God, it's a volcanic eruption.
We found that it's covered with volcanoes. It is tremendously geologically active. There are volcanoes erupting all the time. And what they're erupting is a lot of sulfur, and it gets very hot. And sulfur, when it changes temperature, changes color. It can be red or orange or yellow or black. And so these pictures of the face of Io make it look like a pizza covered with different kinds of cheese and olives where the little black spots are.
Io is not dead. It has over 400 active volcanoes. The largest, Pele, erupts from a gigantic lava lake. It reaches nearly 400 kilometers into space.
If we could stand on the edge of that lava lake and watch that plume shooting off into the blackness of space, that would be an incredible sight.
Pele's eruptions are so huge because Io is so small. There's nothing to withhold the lava, virtually no atmosphere and very little gravity. The volcanoes on Earth are tiny compared to Io's vast eruptions.
Space news from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. New observations are again challenging astronomers' ideas about the so-called volcanoes on Jupiter's moon, Io. For nearly 40 years, astronomers have told us that Io is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. In 1979, NASA's Voyager spacecraft offered scientists on Earth their first glimpse of mysterious structures jetting hundreds of kilometers above the moon's surface, a phenomenon astronomers interpreted as volcanic plumes. But that same year, the world-renowned astrophysicist Thomas Gold proposed that the locations of the so-called volcanoes were instead the sites of powerful electrical discharges. 8 years later, in 1987, Plasma scientist Anthony Peratt and co-author Alex Dessler published the paper Filamentation of Volcanic Plumes on the Jovian satellite Io. Peratt and Dessler argued that the filamentation and cross-sectional shape of the plumes are, quote, consistent with theories developed from laboratory observation. Nevertheless, despite the contributions of Gold, Peratt, and Dessler, planetary scientists have held to the theory that Io's mysterious plumes are the product of volcanism, which is caused by Jupiter gravitationally squeezing the Moon. But the problems with this theory have only continued to grow with better images and data from the Jovian system. NASA scientists have acknowledged their struggle to explain the plume's structure as volcanic in nature. Concerning the so-called volcano Vashatar, they state that the knots and filaments that allow us to track the plume's motions are still mysterious. In recent years, the tidal heating model applied to Io's, quote, volcanoes has been directly falsified by additional discoveries. In 2013, a geologic survey found that the locations of the plumes were incompatible with the predictions of the tidal heating model. And now, scientists observing the so-called plume of the volcano Loki have encountered a new mystery. A new scientist report on the observations states, over decades of study, observers have noticed a pattern. About every 540 days, a wave of brightness starts at one end of the lake of lava and pivots anti-clockwise like a windshield wiper. That front of warmer lava moves about 1 kilometer per day until the whole lake glows hot. Then the surface of Loki cools until the process starts again. But in 2002, right when we thought we had Loki pegged, those phases stopped. Then in 2009, according to recent work by Catherine DeClear at the University of California, Berkeley, they started again, but are now moving clockwise. Appropriate behavior for a feature named after the Norse trickster god. However, anomalous movements of Io's so-called volcanic plumes is not a new problem for astronomers. When the Galileo probe arrived in the Jovian system in 1996, it revealed that the plume of the so-called volcano Prometheus had moved more than 80 kilometers since it was first imaged by the Voyager probe. This fulfilled one of several predictions that physicist and electric universe proponent Wal Thornhill had made prior to the Galileo mission. Thornhill also predicted that the so-called vents of the volcanic plumes would be much hotter than lava, and that the plumes are in fact the jets of moving cathode arcs eroding the periphery of the dark areas that planetary geologists had been calling lava lakes. According to Thornhill, these so-called lava lakes are the solid dark surface of Io beneath the, quote, snow that has been deposited by continuous discharge activity. Therefore, the, quote, lava lakes would not reveal the expected heat of a recent lava flow. Each of these predictions received stunning confirmation. Io's volcanic hotspots were not only hotter than any lava on Earth, but were too hot to be measured by Galileo's instruments. Also, as predicted by Thornhill, the discharging was found to be focused on the edges of the so-called lava lakes, though the rest of these dark fields are comparatively cold. In fact, the expected volcanic vents could not be found, inspiring further astonishment among mission scientists. The, quote, volcanic plumes emit ultraviolet light, something inconceivable under normal conditions of volcanic venting. But ultraviolet light is of course characteristic of an electric arc. Space scientists have come to depend on Io's volcanoes to account for the extraordinary electrical activity witnessed in Jupiter's atmosphere. Many claim that charged particles from Io's volcanoes are responsible for the Jovian auroras, which are 1,000 times more intense than anything seen on Earth. In this scenario, the profuse electrical activity at Jupiter's poles, approximately 10 million volts, is generated mechanically by the planet's spin. Ions from the, quote, volcanoes on Io are thought to travel to the planet's poles, then interact with the magnetic spin-generated electricity to create an extraordinary charge exchange, producing the auroras. The following NASA statement, which quotes investigator Randy Gladstone, reads, "The polar electric fields grab any charged particles they can find and slam them into the atmosphere. Particles for slamming can come from the sun, but Jupiter has another, more abundant source nearby, the volcanic moon Io, which spews oxygen and sulfur ions into Jupiter's spinning magnetic field. Somehow, these ions make their way to Jupiter's poles, where electric fields send them hurtling toward the planet below. Upon entering the atmosphere, their electrons are first stripped away by molecules they run into. But as they slow down, they start grabbing electrons back. The charge exchange reaction produces intense X-ray auroras. This rationale arises from the assumption that Jupiter itself has no net charge. But since it is behaving like a charged body, the scientists look to localized, mechanically induced charge separation, as if an island in space, through some internal process, can acquire and dissipate electric charge. From the electric universe perspective, what is actually occurring is an electrical connection between the Sun, Jupiter, and its moons. In recent years, discoveries have only supported this view. When scientists discovered the most prominent auroral trail, or footprint of Io in the Jovian atmosphere, they assumed it must be an effect of charge separation generated by Io's volcanoes. However, this theory was undermined in 2005, when Hubble images of the Jovian aurora revealed a similar electrical footprint imprinted by the moon Europa with its own swirling plasma tail. A research team wrote of this discovery. Europa is not thought to be volcanic, so what could produce the electrical current that zips along and eventually gives rise to Europa's auroral footprint? NASA investigators also found that the electrical exchange does not stop with Europa, and also includes the moon Ganymede. As reported on this series, in recent years, space scientists have slowly edged closer to recognizing significant electrical discharge activity on planets and moons. It's now known that once a month, when the Earth's magnetotail passes over the moon, the result is electrostatic dust storms and electrical discharges. And in the past year, scientists reported that a coronal mass ejection struck the planet Mars immediately before mysterious plumes were seen jetting hundreds of kilometers into the planet's upper atmosphere, a complete surprise to planetary scientists. The purely gravitational processes that astronomers still prefer have failed to explain Io's so-called volcanoes. But today, the basis is clear for scientists to consider an alternative explanation in our electric universe. For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.